Hello and welcome to Life of Die, the podcast which discusses all things role-playing game and tabletop gaming related. In this first of a series of podcasts, we finally turn our attention to one of our favourite games, Epic. And I'll be joined by my good friend Craig, who's also a fellow Epic fanatic, and together we'll be talking about the game's history and our history with the game. Hi Craig, how you doing?
Hello, yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Good stuff. So where did Epic start for you? Were you first edition or were you later on?
I wasn't first edition, no. So my earliest memories of Epic were my brother, who's 10 years older than me, bringing home, he brought home the Metal Reaver Titan from Adeptus Titanicus, but we didn't have any rules for it. I think he just bought it maybe because he thought it looked cool, and it came with the little 6mm Space Marine that sat on the base as well, just to give you a sense of scale with it and stuff. So yeah, that was the first time I'd seen anything from the Epic line. Prior to that, he'd kind of dabbled a little bit with Rogue Trader and Warhammer Fantasy Battle stuff, so I already had some exposure to like Games Workshop miniatures, so this was definitely a bit different. And I think later on he then maybe split a box of the Warlord Titans with a friend of his, and again they kind of painted them up and stuff, but again we didn't have any rules for it. It was just him buying stuff to paint and play with. And then eventually, when the second edition starter box came out for Space Marine, that was when we got into it. So he went and picked that up and graciously painted it all up. So we had the 3 starter armies that came in that box. So you had a Space Marine army with kind of Land Raiders, Rhinos, and Tactical Marines. You had the Plastic Warlord Titan, which is the same as the one from Adeptus Titanicus. And then you had a small Eldar force of just Guardians and Grav Tanks and Orcs with battle wagons. So and buildings as well. So it gave you a really good starter. It was still one of the best starter boxes I think Games Workshop have done, and certainly of that era. To give you 3 armies out of the box is really cool. And give you a chance to explore the kind of different races a little bit. So yeah, picked that up. Didn't really expand on it massively. So when I look back at the time, I always thought we had masses of stuff. But when I look back at the photos, all that we really did, we expanded a little bit on Space Marine armies, the Eldar, picked up Imperial Guard, which was one of the other factions, and kind of dove into that quite a bit because I think we're both kind of into sort of real world military history in World War. The Imperial Guard kind of spoke to us because it was more tanks and artillery pieces and flyers and everything like that came with them. So that was one of our favourites. And we also expanded a little bit in the Orcs, but when I actually look back again in the photos, I think we actually really only had a couple of clans worth, so maybe less than 2,000 points. So really small games we were probably playing. And this kind of carried on, trickling in a few new bits and bobs every few months for a couple of years. And then in 1995, Titan Legions was released, and at that point, a couple of my friends from school were also getting into 40k. So the second edition 40k box had just been released as well, and we're getting into that. And later on, Necromunda in late 95. So my friends were getting into that for the painting aspect as well as a little bit gaming, and I was managing to kind of pull them into Epic about at the same time. So one of my friends picked up the Titan Legions box set, which came with the Imperator Titan and the Mega Gargants and the Knights and all the kind of big toys, and it also had updated rules for second edition, so that kind of refreshed everything a little bit and gave us new stuff to play with. And from that point on, I think I was kind of more or less following the Games Workshop release schedule. So after Titan Legions, they were releasing stuff pretty solidly every month and giving you rules in White Dwarf and all that. So there was things like the Eldar Revenant Titans and the Flyers and the Chimeras, I remember. So as all that stuff came out, we were buying it and playing with it and adding it to our armies. And again, my brother was painting it all because I couldn't paint for toffee at the time, and arguably haven't improved too much, but yeah, there's that.
Don't think so.
Well, so
being modest.
Yes, fishing for compliments, more like. But no, it's like it is annoying actually when I look back at the stuff he painted back in the day with rubbish paints and no tutorials and stuff, and he was still knocking it out of the park, whereas I still struggle to achieve that level. But yeah, we were playing kind of solidly through that kind of Titan Legions era into sort of 1996, and then 1997 came along and Epic 40,000 was kind of touted, and at that stage I was getting into my teens and my brother had left for uni, so didn't really have anyone to play with, and that was a kind of natural stopping point almost for it anyway. Well, I think we both kind of took a look at it and we decided it was kind of too much to take on and relearn everything and get into it. So it felt like a kind of natural stopping point with it. And that's not to say we didn't, we played a couple of odd games beyond that. It's not as if we were totally burnt everything as soon as that came out or anything like that. As I know, I'm sure a few dramatic people will have attested to. But it was just a kind of natural stopping point for us. And then I kind of fell out of the hobby in my teens and early 20s. I kept dipping in and out with buying the occasional White Dwarf or just kind of checking out the website, that kind of thing. But Epic 40,000 third edition passed me by entirely, as did Epic Armageddon. I didn't find out about Epic Armageddon until probably 2014 or something, which at that point obviously it came out in 2003, 2005, I think, and it's ran its course by then. So yeah, it wasn't until maybe 2014 I started getting a little nostalgia pang for it again, and I went back and picked up the Epic 40,000 third edition starter box. As I said, the second edition starter box was really good, but the third edition one is incredible. It's the amount of miniatures you get in it. You only get orcs and marines, but you get a massive variety of stuff with it, and it's like much more highly detailed models for the most part. A lot of them are just recasts of the originals, but there's lots of new stuff in there. So that really kind of helped me pick up the bug again for it. And at that point, I was thinking, again, not doing any research into it, I just thought, I'll pick up this box set and then I'll maybe see if there's anyone around to play it with. Only then realizing it was another dead edition I'd picked up already, and there wasn't anyone playing it for the most part. So slightly disheartened, but I thought, I'll paint it all up anyway, and I'll just enjoy it myself as a kind of painting challenge or a little bit of a dipping the toe back into the hobby. And then I think it was maybe a year after that, I was looking around on the forums and then got chatting to you, and turns out we're in the same city. We both had played a lot of second edition, and you'd moved on to NetEpic at this point, which is the kind of fan continuation of the second edition rule set, and including all the kind of additional stuff that was in the Citadel journals and FAQs, and everything's been kind of tweaked and polished. So yeah, that obviously totally grabbed me, and the opportunity to play again was a good draw for me. So yeah, we started playing at the local club a few times after that, and the rest is history.
It became good friends. A really nice thing to come out of Epic,
absolutely.
which particularly through a kind of shared hobby initially. Usually you already know somebody that's into the hobby.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one for me because I say I've never really considered myself to be a wargamer or anything like that. I've never engaged with the wargaming community, so it was a totally new experience for me. So I'm glad you were gentle.
Although
if I do remember, if I do remember, you totally destroyed me in those first few games. So that was. Yeah.
Oh well, that must have been why I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you were. Can we do this again? Can we do this again?
Brilliant. He's hopeless. I don't really have that recollection of it, but yeah, I'll take your word for it, definitely.
What about yourself? What was your journey?
Mine went back a wee bit further than yours, pretty much to the start of Epic. I mentioned in other podcasts that Judge Dredd was the first thing that I got into, and from a gaming point of view, because I was a 2000 AD fan, discovered the Judge Dredd role-playing game that Games Workshop made. Because I discovered that, I then got a couple issues of White Dwarf, because at that time they used to do scenarios and stuff for role-playing games. That's how old this was. So this was and at the same time in those issues, there was an advertisement for a new game that was coming out called Warhammer 40,000, and we were quite interested in it. We liked this kind of stormtroopery looking human kind of characters that they had, although it was the old beakies back then, for anybody that knows the difference between the Marines. Myself and a couple of friends bought Warhammer 40,000 first edition, the Rogue Trader, and got a couple of miniatures, played Battle at the Farm, which was the scenario that was with it, and then there was I think there was another one or two scenarios that were published in White Dwarf, and we had to go to them. But it never really, for some reason, I don't really know why, we liked it, but we didn't love it. It was fun, but I think part of it was just we didn't, even at that stage for us, just as kind of young teenagers, I think, so it was about 87 or something, I think that might have been. We didn't really have much disposable income, so we weren't really in the position to buy loads of miniatures and so on. So I think Judge Dredd kind of dominated for a while after that, role-playing wise, because there was little cost involved in that, because a lot of the time I would write my own scenarios and adventures and stuff. Anyway, fast forward to 1989, January 89, it was my birthday, just had money burning a hole in my pocket, went into Glasgow with some friends and was in buying some like graphic novels and stuff, and had a look in Games Workshop, because again at that stage they still had they were still selling, I think, the miniatures for Judge Dredd and so on, so there was times I was picking up stuff for that. But I was always kind of interested in nosing about. And anyway, I saw this. They used to have like a kind of, because it was January, my birthday, they had sales. They had a January sale. I don't know if Games Workshop still do this, to be honest. I'm not really in enough to know these things, but certainly at that time, they used to have these kind of bargains in a January sale. And one of the things that jumped right out at me was Adeptus Titanicus because of frankly, the box art. And so this was the first edition, Adeptus Titanicus. And the art, I was like, wow, that's incredible. Like these huge war machines, and you can see the little land raiders and infantry at their feet. And it was £10 basically for that. So the whole set, £10. So I was like, okay, give me a bit of go, and enjoyed it. I did like it. We played, I think you get 6, from memory, it was 6 Battle Titans that you got in the box. And so we used to play 3 versus 3. It was fine. It was, fun, but it kind of felt like it was really only a battle between 6 models, if that makes sense, which it was really, I suppose. So there was, it never really felt, it felt like it promised from the pictures, and particularly in the kind of box art on the side of the box, they had photographs of those. I think, was it a Reaver Titan that was on it? I think it might have been the one you're talking about. I could be wrong, maybe it wasn't, but it was certainly, there was a picture of a Titan, and it showed you pictures of Land Raiders and the Marines, the Space Marines. That was the point where it captured my imagination. It wasn't Adeptus Titanicus itself on its own terms, if you like. It was a promise that this is just the start of something which is much bigger, and it's going to be something that is going to allow you to have these huge battle titans and vehicles and infantry. And as somebody that was really into science fiction, and as I said, 2000 AD, I was into Star Wars and things like that, the idea of having a mass battle, just like, it really had my imagination going crazy. And so I was waiting that whole summer for Space Marine to come out, first edition Space Marine. And as soon as that happened, I was totally up for that. The one thing retrospectively I would say about first edition was it was quite hard to actually complete a game, because there was scenarios in it where you could probably do it quite quickly. Like there was ones where you had to get the Rhino from one side of the board to the other alive or something like that. There was a few different missions, but we always tended to go for the kind of death match, as it were, and tried to make the battles as big as we possibly could, because like that was what really fed our imagination. The fact that you could fight these mass battles, and it really was an epic scale. So it really captured our imagination in a way that 40,000 hadn't, because of the sweep of the game, really, I suppose, is the long shot. And I think probably that is something that Epic fans in general, I think that probably is their number one reason for wanting to play it, because it's the scale of it, and it's the fact that you've got buildings getting destroyed, you've got infantry and vehicles, and you get your cavalry, and you just basically get every type of force that you can possibly, or variation within your force that you can possibly think of. But yeah, it became a bit of a problem laterally in first edition, because what we were finding when we were doing these death matches, because we were doing them fairly large scale, was that it was impossible to do it across an afternoon. Yeah, we would play pretty much 6 hours, 2 days in a row in this, and there was times it still didn't finish, because it was just possibly because we were young, we were slower. I don't know. I don't think that was necessarily the case. I think it was much more to do with the fact that back then in first edition, there was a lot of things that were really, really quite, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's kind of crunchy, isn't it? That's what the gamers call it. It's lots of chits, lots of stats, lots of tables, charts, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all the vehicles had to be damaged first and then destroyed, from memory. It was like they had superficial damage, then destroyed. So all the vehicles were, it's laterally with second edition, they stripped out a lot of that, and it made the game much more manageable. But yeah, there was other things like, for example, the one that sticks in my head the most was the Land Raiders, because they had the las cannons on the side. It was like the kind of fire arc was, you could fire the one in the left 180 degrees, and then the same in the right side. So what was happening a lot, and I think this was part of the reason why it took us ages, was because we were all trying to get our Land Raiders absolutely perfect, that they could face directly onto a target. You know what I mean? There was too much time going into that to make sure that, right, so it's dead on, so we can fire both las cannon. It's a really stupid thing, but it didn't bother us at the time. It just was part of the game. That's the way it was. But I do remember thinking when second edition came out and the Land Raiders were suddenly 180 forward rather than haven't been able to fire behind them, which they were able to do before. I thought that was really bizarre. But in actual fact, it was like a godsend, because it was so annoying trying to just get them just right
Yeah.
to fire at that particular infantry unit or that particular tank.
And I think it's a bit of a funny one. It's a good example, but I think when you see the design of a Land Raider, up close, its weapon sponsons can't possibly fire like both of them at the same target if it's directly in front of them, unless you do line it perfectly up. And it's just one of those things, but there has to be some kind of level of abstraction granted to it, because I guess the idea is that you're not putting that model's not stopping and then twitching itself into position a dozen times to get the perfect shot off. It's probably moving 20 meters when it's stationary on the table. It's actually doing a little jiggle around the table and doing all that kind of stuff. But you're trying to kind of convey that as streamlined as possible. I think the way that second edition does that is by just saying, yeah, it can fire anything, because the assumption is it will make its own movements and maybe fire one off and then turn a bit and fire the other or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but it was, so that went on for a few years, and as I say, it became increasingly difficult trying to convince friends to do it. So it was pretty much me and just one other friend at the time. By the end of it, my brother would play as well, and so yeah. But then when second edition came along, that was a couple of years later. I think it was 91 from memory. It was either 90 or 91. I think it was 91. I got that straight away, and I think when I first bought it, I think I was in Games Workshop in Glasgow again, which at that time was in Queen Street, and I was watching one of the guys was playing it, and I was kind of just asking questions from the sideline. I had picked it up, obviously, anyway. And then when I was seeing how infantry wasn't getting saves and how there was no superficial damage to the tanks, and it just seemed really lethal. It seemed like it was like, what are they doing? Why have they done this? And I remember as well thinking when I read the rules, and I was wrong, by the way, before I say this, but I do remember when I read the rules, I was like, they've just like totally dumbed this down. They've taken all the kind of detail out of this. And the thing that's ironic about that, of course, as you know, is people who have played subsequent editions of Epic say that the second edition's really crunchy. Well, it had nothing in first, really. It has been streamlined down massively. Yeah, as I say, I just couldn't believe how lethal it was, and I kind of thought, oh man, they've just stripped out the whole thing. But having said that, once we started playing it, I think it was probably it might well have even been the first game that we played it was like a revelation, because suddenly, instead of having these sessions that were running an entire weekend, we could actually run a battle in an afternoon, and it just seemed brilliant to us. It was like, wow, look, they have actually made this so much better, and it really, really worked. And it meant as well that we had decent armies at that stage, because I don't mean in terms of the blister packs and stuff, because obviously that was where a lot of the kind of special units were. We didn't really have a lot of the lead stuff, but what we did have was, at that time, Battle Titans box set that you mentioned that your brother had. We got that, so we had, I don't know where they've all gone, but anyway, I think I've got about 6 of them left, but I definitely had 6 from Adeptus Titanicus and I had another 6 from that Battle Titans box. And we had obviously stacks of Land Raiders and Tactical Marines and Orc Boys, Battle Wagons, Eldar Grav tanks, the old versions, which are still what I use, and Guardians pretty much. And I think it was round about the time when second edition came out that's when they introduced all the Armies of the Imperium. Was the first one that came out, which had the Imperial Guard and had the Space Marines. And that was a really good supplement. I really liked that. And I think my only disappointment about Armies of the Imperium was I wanted the Eldar in there straight away. But I mean, it wasn't that long after it was 92, Renegades came out, which had Chaos and Eldar. And so, I at least had a decent Marine force and a decent Eldar force. And at that stage, I think that's when they were bringing out the kind of boxes of more kind of specialist. Specialist is probably going too far, but there was a Space Marine box, and it was like you get a sprue or several sprues, and it went from it just being all tactical, bog standard Marines to it had the tactical ones still in it, but they were redesigned. Plus, they had the Devastator guys, the missile launchers, and they had the assault troops in them. And I think at that stage, that's when the bikes were in those as well. That's where they came from.
Yeah, they had bikes, land speeders, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a box set that I snapped up pretty quickly. And basically, as the things get released, I got the Imperial Guard version, and then once Renegades was out, I had bought the Chaos box set and the Eldar one set, and then again, and later on in '92 when the Orc and Squat Warlords came out, I then picked up the box sets for those as well. So later on, they then reduced the size of those. I think they pretty much made them half the size, although they only dropped the price about a quarter or something like that. I remember that was a bone of contention amongst us all of it. Oh, they're charging us more for half the amount, or sorry, not as much, but like they should have cut the price in half is what our argument was basically. And they were already ripping us off. This long before the prices probably really did get out of control. But yeah, we were always moaning about how Games Workshop were trying to get one over us, and also about how there was some really cool units that were only in blister packs and we couldn't get them, and because we couldn't afford it because we were just teenagers. But those plastic box sets were great because it did mean you had a decent army and a decent variety of things that you could play and really enjoy second edition without having. We always did want the LED stuff. There was always units in there that we really wanted. I remember, for example, the Tempest being a good example. I've always loved Tempest in second edition for my older force. And at the time all we did was painted grav tanks a different colour scheme to differentiate between them.
Yeah, we did a lot of that with the Marine vehicles as well, because once you've got the Rhino, obviously you can do whatever you want with it. You can stick bits to it. You can use Orc battle wagon turrets and turn them into Predators, and we had the kind of single Lego blocks mounted in the back to represent whirlwinds and stuff. So yeah, it's funny what having no pocket money will drive you to. But in fairness, I still do that sort of stuff today with conversions. So.
Well, I mean, I think that's a great thing. I mean, I've never really had the imagination for that side of things, to be honest. I've just never really been that good with the modelling side or the painting side. That's another thing probably worth mentioning, was that I had no interest whatsoever really in painting the stuff. I didn't like doing it, and all I wanted to do was play the game. That was my first consideration and my last consideration. So for a long time, a lot of my armies were completely unpainted. In fact, I only got to play in Games Workshop. I knew I wanted to get a game in there, and I get this horrible red spray paint which had a kind of glossy finish. It was just spray painted all red because that was the kind of Blood Angels was the colour scheme, and I think I painted the tracks black, and that was about it. Really, that was my concession to painting. But it was a pretty bad job, and it was certainly remarked upon when I went into Games Workshop when it was. What's this? The Blotch Marines, I think the guy called it. And I was quite annoyed about that because I thought, well, I painted the damn things. I've played the game.
It's fairly crushing.
And then what was even more crushing was when we actually played that day. It was I think it was only a 2,000 point game, Marines versus Eldar, and it literally came down. I think it went on for about 4 turns because it was on an 8x4 board, and so that meant there was a lot of movement going on. It was actually it was a really good fun game. But it was really close all the way through, and it was one of the guys in the shop that I was playing, and it came down to he had done enough that we knew he'd just scraped over the threshold, or it was exactly on the threshold for victory. So we knew he had definitely at least drawn, and I was close to it. That must have been what it was. But basically, what did it was he he'd done his psychic attacks with his Eldar Warlock, and hadn't done anything, and his last roll of the dice was he was losing at this stage. That's what it was, and his last roll of the dice was to roll with the pistols with the Warlock against my Land Raider. So he rolled a 5, so he hit, and then all I had to do was roll 2+, and I rolled a 1, and it destroyed it. And I think I lost the objective, and he won the game. And the other guys in the shop were going, no way. they were all raging because they were kind of rooting for me. So yeah, that's still a defeat. That
it's clearly etched in the mind.
Exactly. I mean, that must have been about 30 years ago or something. 1991 Armies of Imperium came out. That's scary when you start talking about 30 years ago. So it's funny. Sometimes Epic, there's certain games do just stick in the memory. And that definitely is the biggest.
There's an interesting one actually I heard the other day is you never remember your victories. You always remember your defeats. I think that's quite true actually with wargaming. I think I can just about remember all my defeats, but victories are kind of
But there's sometimes the game spits out things that are really kind of unique.
Yeah, it's kind of an emerging narrative, I guess, isn't it? It's a much more pulled back camera view of the battle from the kind of almost role playing style of like Rogue Trader and stuff, but you still get these narrative moments out of a game like that.
Yeah, and another moment like that kind of stuck in my head was my nephew. This must have been about 10 years ago. I was playing him at NetEpic, and he hit my Titan with whatever it was. I can't remember what it was. Shot my Titan, but basically it hit the weapon. It was carrying a volcano cannon or something like that, or a quake cannon. Anyway, it hit that and it blew the arm off of it, and then it basically crushed. The way it landed, it crushed infantry in a vehicle and destroyed a vehicle. He absolutely loved that. He was just like, that was suddenly like, oh, that was amazing. That was such a cool thing. So yeah, that's one of the things I've always liked about second edition. Sometimes there are kind of strange things that happen in it. Not that often, really, which is, not a bad thing.
Yeah, it's a funny one because I remember the iconic kind of battle report from second edition when they did the bloody Studio Army versus a Latok Eldar. That was one of the ones. And they had the reactor meltdown of the Warlord Titan, and they had the kind of spray foam insulation all painted up to make it look like a nuclear meltdown, and that looked really cool. And I remember playing it originally as a kid, and that happened not every game, but every time that Warlord blew up, it had I think we must have rolled sixes and get reactor meltdowns and took out half the table. And that was a regular occurrence. And I think in every game we've played, I don't think it's happened yet, which is really weird.
Well, the reason it's not happened is we took off the, I think, first of all, NetEpic either fixed, I don't think it did actually.
That's right. They made it harder to hit the reactor, didn't they? They've changed it. You can't hit it from the front now or something. Is that it?
I think it's a house rule. Actually, we've got that. We don't. We just said this is garbage because basically you just hit the reactor and that thing blows apart quite easily. And I think we agreed because of the fact that the Reaver doesn't have it in that location and never has done, and neither does the Warhound. Their reactors are in the back, so it just seemed like there was no incentive to take Warlords because the Warlord was just basically asking to be shot in the reactor and went down too easily. So it was.
Yeah.
I think that is actually a house rule that we've adopted.
Okay. So that's it just shows how much you've analysed the game more than I did. I used to just play it.
I agree with you though, they used to go down with alarming regularity.
Yeah.
So yeah, second edition was a lot of fun, and it was I played a lot of games of second edition, and then I think really by the time Orc & Squat Warlords came out, at that stage that's when I started going clubbing and going to gigs and things, and so there was competing things for my money, and I really didn't have the time really, and more friends were less interested, put it that way, than playing in the games. So yeah, I had a bit of a hiatus really. I think I was already out of it by the time even Hive War came out with the Tyranids, which I did know about and I was aware of, and kind of liked the idea of it as somebody that was a fan of, like say Aliens and all that stuff. I think that was pre-Starship Troopers. I feel like that came out maybe a couple of years after that. I can't remember, but yeah, I missed out on Hive War. And yeah, definitely by the time Titan Legions came out, I'd missed that as well. So I knew of it again, and I'd seen the Imperator Titan. My initial feeling was that it was putting more emphasis, obviously, as the name would imply, onto the Titans, and I like to balance with second edition, so I wasn't really that keen in investing in it. And as I say, it was more just to do with financial pressure, so I've got nothing bad to say about it. I've just never really used it. I've always kind of been very much, my army lists are very much that kind of period of Armies of the Imperium Renegades and Orc & Squat Warlords. And that's just the way my collection's always really been. So yeah, I dropped out for probably about the best part of 10 years. Occasionally we'd be, myself and one or two of my friends or my brother or whatever, we'd play, we didn't not play. It was just more a case of it was, maybe every couple of months we'll dig it out and have a go at it. So, but by and large, I wasn't involved with Epic so much. I did see an early version, I remember in I'm sure it was the late 90s, an early version of NetEpic. When my pals had discovered this on the internet and downloaded the rules, and yeah, we really liked that. That gave us a wee bit of a resurgence with it because we felt one of the things that was a big problem in second edition was the initiative system, where for anyone that doesn't know it, it basically is both sides roll the dice. Whoever gets the highest wins initiative, and they can pick whether they move first or second. And particularly in the first turn, it seemed to be that everything hinged upon who won the initiative, because you basically, if you lost it, you had to move all your opponent, if they were smart, would make you move first, and then what you would inevitably find would be that the kind of specialist troops, they would be able to jump any ones that were kind of exposed, tanks, the kind of basic infantry like tacticals or boys or something like that. You would, if you had the Eldar, that was, and again, that was a favourite for myself and other regular opponents. Everybody wanted to have the Eldar, so pretty much every game we played, pretty much at that time, had Eldar in it, because we loved the Striking Scorpions and the Howling Banshees and the Dark Reapers. So they were great at these kind of individual things. We didn't at that stage we didn't really use a lot of tacticals or guardians or whatever, because we realised the worth really of these kind of specialist infantry units. So that was a big problem with second edition, was that thing where whoever lost initiative knew they were going to get jumped pretty much. They had to leave stuff. There would be stuff that would be exposed unless they just sat at the back end of the table. And then really when NetEpic came out and changed that about, where it then became whoever won initiative could decide whether they moved one unit first or second, and then you alternated between the two. That was really amazing in making the game a lot better. And to this day, I try and say to second edition players they should try NetEpic, because that alone just made it so much better, and gave it so much more balance, because it meant both sides were getting stuff jumped, because there's a bit of ebb and flow between the two sides moving individual units. And so I would never go back to second edition for that particular, just for that reason alone. But there's a lot of stuff in NetEpic which has fixed one or two things. Particularly a couple of the costings. The Wind Rider host in particular was one that really stuck out to me. We used to always buy 2 Wind Rider hosts for our Eldar because it was so cheap, and you get like 35 bytes for it for something like 650 points or something. So we used to have like just ridiculous amounts of bikes on the on the battlefields, and so that was a good fix. And one or two other good fixes, like the Praetorians, for example, were pretty brittle in second edition. It was a 1+ save, and if you failed it, the thing's destroyed. But then they brought in the hit location charts basically for the Praetorians, which for the most part, which I thought was a good move, because it kind of meant they weren't quite as brittle. On the flip side, though, the Praetorians are pretty strong, particularly the squat ones, almost to the point where, would you really want a Warlord Titan against one of them? I'm not sure you would, and they're about 400 points more. So I don't know. Maybe they should have introduced the hit locations and possibly tweaked them up a wee bit further in the costings. But overall, I would say that I was really pleased with NetEpic, and it was just like, once I'd got into that, there was no real going back. So yeah, that NetEpic ended up being where I ended up, and I had also missed some of the other editions which came out, which you'd alluded to. Obviously, third edition in 1997. I don't think I've even seen the rules for third edition, but I know you're keen. This is something we've been talking about recently.
I am, yeah. I mean, I can jump in there on that one. It's one of those ones, when I first saw the preview for the rules and I saw the unit detachment cards and the way you build your army, it again overwhelmed my child brain at the time. Just again, moving from that really simple system of having all your detachments, on a card, you could sit when you're not in your kind of downtime when you're not playing the game, building up lists just by grabbing cards out the box and laying them out on the carpet and doing all that kind of stuff. That was a big part of the game for me. Was that kind of meta game of building army lists and just looking at the different units and imagining it, being a poor child with no money to actually afford to buy the models. So when I saw this, effectively you just get a blank notepad and you're just told to go wild with Epic 40,000. I just couldn't get it into my head. I just couldn't work it out. And then I started seeing examples of units that were different sizes to the ones that were in second edition, and then the blisters being released started coming in with like 4 tanks in a blister when it used to be 3. And again, that kind of put me off it, thinking, at first I just thought this is some sort of shameless cash grab. There was a whole strip bases thing as well, which I didn't appreciate. Was not a requirement, but it was more of an aesthetic thing, because you can display the models better, you can paint them on the base. But to my mind, they were trying to force everyone to ditch all their old models and buy everything fresh again. And the cynic in me at 12 or 13 years old or whatever it was just like, nah, I'm not having this. And again, like I say, it's a natural stopping point. But weirdly, it's one of those ones that, as I've now matured and wizened in my age, I've came back and had a look at it. And the rulebook is it's the opposite. It's further abstracted on second edition. So the rulebook I've got in my hand at the moment, it's 48 pages long, A5, most of it's pictures. It's dead simple. I think it's based on a kind of modern combat or a World War II mass combat system. It's not chain of command, but something like that. And it's really flexible. Like your detachments are no longer 6 stands of Devastator Marines in a detachment. It's now, you can put whatever you want in a detachment. You can mix up dreadnoughts and tactical marines and devastators and tanks and whatever, and have them all, and they basically become a kind of blob. And that blob has a kind of firepower rating associated with it,
right,
depending on what units are in it. And I think it kind of moves as fast as the slowest unit and that kind of thing. So you're encouraged, obviously, to keep bikes together and kind of tactical trips together and that kind of thing. But you're not restricted to do that. So you can effectively build up your own army with just the models you have and play with anything. So you're not restricted anymore by I've only got 2 tanks, I've only got 2 predators, I can't use them, which used to be a thing, especially as we used to do bargain bin diving in Games Workshop too. You often came out with odd vehicles that couldn't quite put together an old second edition formation out of. So that's actually really appealing to me now, and just the way it works, the activation system's a bit more modern as well. I mean, it came out in 1997, but it's much similar to kind of modern activation systems we play, where it's not quite an I go, you go. You roll initiative a lot more often for it, and you put chits into a bag. So the player with the higher strategy rating has more chips in the bag to pull than the player with a lower strategy rating to kind of simulate that. They get to move more often, or they've got more chance of moving more often, kind of thing. So it does lots of clever stuff. And things like flyers in it work better. They're not an actual unit on the table anymore. They're a kind of resource that you call in, and they kind of do a strafing run and then fly off the board, and they don't stick about and do this kind of weird zigzag thing like a fly on a window where they're trying to stay on the board. It just streamlines everything, it seems. And it also allows you to play much bigger battles with kind of all the toys on the table and still play them in a kind of reasonable time, is what I gather from it. Now, this is all coming from no place of reference other than just what I've read about it, because as a voice on the internet, that makes me an authority on it, but I've never actually played it. So it's something I'm really keen on trying, though, and I think it's probably one that I could see myself playing a lot more of. The thing that annoyed a lot of people about it was the Epic Second Edition got to the stage where there was hundreds of units per force. And even when I look at my collection now, because my collection, similar to yours, is mostly based on that Second Edition era, with a few odd units thrown in from the later releases now, and some proxies and third party stuff. But for the most part, I've went on the nostalgia wagon and tried to collect everything from Second Edition that I didn't have as a kid and stuff that I did have as a kid. And even now, having been back in the hobby for 6-7 years and spending a fair chunk of cash on it, I'm still nowhere near collected everything for all the armies. And I don't think I ever will. I'm not aiming for that. But at the same time, it just shows you how much there was in Second Edition. So when it came to third edition, each army list or each list of available units is stripped down to maybe, like, for the Space Marines, for example, they've maybe got like 30 types of unit now, as opposed to, I don't know how many would have been in second, maybe closer to like 60, something like that. Effectively, I guess that's a bad example because the Marines never had that massive variety of units. But when you think about orcs, when you think about all the orc vehicles, you had lungbusters, gut rippers, bone crunchers, brain crushers, gob smashers, all those kind of things. They've all been abstracted down to just like a battle wagon now. So there's no variety, and I think that's the biggest complaint people have, is the perception that it lost that flavor, that you no longer had these weird rules for the orc stuff. As an example, there was none of this, rolling an artillery dice to see if it misfired and then putting down a template and then seeing if it scatters, or all that kind of thing that was inherently kind of orky that made the orcs flavorful. Is effectively just gambling on the table. All that was lost, and the orcs just got a firepower rating in the same way that a big blob of Marines got a firepower rating. I think that probably put a lot of people off. But again, that does kind of appeal to me because it's something that I didn't play a lot of orcs as a kid. We only had a small force of them, and we didn't have much of the weirder stuff. But now I'm really keen on it. I've got a big orc army. I've spent a lot of money building a massive orc collection, but I've never played them. But at the same time, when I look through the rules of them, I just think some of the stuff just sounds like an absolute faff. Some of it sounds like so much. First of all, it's a massive gamble to even take it and use it. And second of all, just remembering how it works is going to be a lot of rule checking for me. And I'm glad I'll have you by my side to keep me right, because I know you've played them a lot. But it's one of those ones it just doesn't appeal to me massively. I don't know if I'm just getting lazier in my old age. I just want things to be streamlined. And I think that's what Epic 40,000 does.
It's fair comment.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry to name drop here and all that, but I did actually mention this to Andy Chambers when he was on talking to me about Judge Dredd. Afterwards, I said that you were really keen in playing third edition, and he said basically it just wasn't the right time for it, but he stands by that it's a really good version of Epic, and certainly according to the wiki for it as well, apparently both Jervis and Andy maintain it was the best set of rules that they ever conceived.
Yeah.
But I think he said there was, I think he admitted that there was a lot of special rules, particularly for orcs, that it was like every unit pretty much was getting special rules in second edition. And it probably could have done a wee bit less of that, but people just weren't ready for that going from pretty much all units having special rules and quirks and all that kind of thing to this more abstract way of playing. So no, I'm excited about the idea that we're going to play this at some point once this pandemic's over. So
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how it goes, because the fact that he thinks it's a lot better than it makes me think, yeah, we should definitely give this a try and give it a go and see where it takes us, and see if we do actually find it more fun, which I'm hoping, because it's not that I don't enjoy Epic in the first place, because I do, but I'm kind of open to the idea of trying other things.
Yeah, it's good to be able to use your same collection and it be familiar to you. It's not hopefully a total jump into the deep end kind of experience, but yeah, I think it's probably akin to the way people felt, the way you described earlier, feeling when moving from first edition to second edition. There's that initial kind of trepidation about it, and I can see why it would have put a lot of people off initially. And I think there is some stuff. I mean, it's been fixed later on. It almost feels like, I don't know if it was. This is maybe something we could chat Andy on about next time you have a cup of tea with him. But it's one of the things. It feels like it was almost released as a kind of concise product. There wasn't as much. I think things like the actual armies. There wasn't. I don't think squats were in it initially. I don't know if that's maybe just the timeline of the universe. The squats have maybe been wiped out at this point. If they were trying to keep it to that, it seemed to be very much a partner product to 40k, which was going into maybe third edition, or just about to go into third edition at that stage. And it felt like a partner product to that. The idea was that you could recreate your 40k armies as detachments in Epic 40,000 and effectively play out an entire game of 40k in a single turn in Epic 40k, and you could have multiple versions of that. And I think it also tied in with Battlefleet Gothic, which was coming out about the same time. Very similar order systems, and the idea was you could do this kind of overarching campaign, the kind of thing we've always talked about doing with like the Star Wars universe with X-Wing and Legion and whatever else, where you can have these you can have a single campaign that covers all three game systems. And I think it was that one of the kind of first attempts that Games Workshop maybe did at trying to pull all that together, and it maybe just didn't quite hit the mark, or maybe a little bit ahead of its time. But yeah, it certainly seems like that's what it was geared up for. But then, similar to like NetEpic, it was continued along by the fans and by Games Workshop as well. They released, I think it was Firepower magazine, which was like a kind of supplement for it, which then introduced army lists for things like the Squats, Natau, the Gene Stealer cults, and all that kind of stuff. So they did support it a little bit beyond its original life, but it felt like the actual main release was almost designed to be a kind of concise standalone product. And like I say, that starter box is so good, you could just play with that. You could pick that up and never buy anything new for it if you really wanted to. But yeah, it's an interesting one to look back on and to see what other games have pulled from it. And I think that's again where they kind of went into fourth edition or Epic Armageddon a good number of years later, took elements of that and kind of refined it further. I think one of the criticisms of third edition that people have is that that things like Titans don't feel as beefy as they should, because again they're abstracted down to just a kind of damage rating or hit points or whatever, versus having the same kind of flavor, I guess, as second edition. But again, that's something that's been fixed in kind of supplements, and I think they even did. Was it Adeptus Titanicus 2 was a supplement for Epic 40,000, which was kind of released just as a kind of rule sheet for it to allow you to play Titans with a bit more flavour. So yeah, it's something I'm really keen on trying out.
No, we'll definitely do it. I'm quite excited to do that. Obviously, the way things are at the moment, just getting a game of Epic will be
anything.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, obviously you've probably maybe seen in the internet, I've got a game coming up online against John Webb's on the Crown of Command. So I've been working on my squad army list and writing an article about it. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
because it's kind of following the same thing that you used to see in the White Dwarfs magazines for second edition, where it's Andy himself and Jervis and Gav Thorpe as well, I'm sure, was involved in some of them, where they wrote out these battle reports, so they would pick all their forces and explain their choices and all that stuff. And then there was the actual battle report, and then there was the actual fallout. So I'm actually quite excited to be part of that, especially because what Josh is doing over in the Crown of Command is really exciting, and it's so authentic to that 90s period, which...
Oh, the Hero Hammer Easing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, it's really well done.
Look it up if you haven't already.
Yeah,
for anybody that's listening. Yeah, it's the production values are fantastic on it. I think really pretty much what we are saying at the moment as well about looking back in our history of it. Obviously that 90s was the kind of golden period for Epic.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, it's great to see people still, we're not the only people that feel passionate about that. So that's
It's a bit of a tragedy, really, because obviously there seems to be a massive resurgence in it at the moment because of people in lockdown that are kind of trawling through their nostalgia and picking it back up again, but they're kind of picking it back up at a bad time when they can't potentially play it with anyone. But it does seem to be having a bit of a resurgence, which is good to see.
I'm hoping though that people are just painting their armies just now, and as soon as the lockdown's over, they are going to meet up. Like we're going to, we're going to do that.
Definitely, yeah, that'd be good.
And get a few games. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens with third edition or experience what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I suppose we should move on then to Epic Armageddon, which is fourth edition.
Yep.
Which I have had a little bit of experience of, not massively, I wouldn't say. There is something about the rules that I just don't quite get. I don't know what it is. I have played a few games, but there's something to do with I think it was something to do with the crossfire thing. I just couldn't get my head around it. I don't know why. I'm just being thick, I think, is the long and short of it. But I did like a lot about it.
Yeah.
I loved obviously I missed out in third edition, which I'm assuming is something similar with the turn sequence where you're activating straight off and you're moving and firing all in the one activation. Whereas with second edition, it was you moved your units, then you had the first fire phase, then you had close combat, then advanced fire phase. Whereas this is all like as soon as you move and engage, you resolve the combat as well. And that to me was a bit of a revelation. I thought it just made it much more, I don't know, it just made it feel like there was stuff happening all the time. I always felt with the movement phase, you were kind of waiting for first fire and close combat and advanced, that the movement phase was a bit, kind of dancing around the edges and not really getting on with the action. So I was really excited by that with Epic Armageddon, which is why I ended up trying to port it to a certain degree into NetEpic, where I basically did the same thing where it's like you activated, it's my evolution video, it's actually one of the most popular videos on my channel. There's loads of people watched that, and I'm quite surprised at it. But yeah, you and I pretty much played that, but that really was because I enjoyed that activation system so much in 4th edition. I don't know if you did many games of Epic Armageddon yourself or not.
No, I never played it. I didn't even know about it until I got back into stuff in 2014-ish. So, but yeah, I've since looked into it, and yeah, again, it's not massively grabbed me. One of my kind of favorite gaming YouTubers, Ash Barker, who does Guerrilla Miniature Games, he did a little bit of a series on it, Throwback Thursdays thing, where he played like 3 games of it, and that's the first time I've actually sat down and watched it and kind of followed the rules and got into it. But it still just doesn't have that appeal to me. It's really abstracted again, a bit like 3rd edition. Stuff can kind of, if you put things on charge or march, I think it is, they can move like triple, and you can effectively have stuff in your opponent's deployment zone on turn, that kind of thing, which is maybe good because it maybe gives you a bit more maneuverability, which I think 2nd edition could suffer from, because with a lot of stuff maybe moving 10, 20 centimeters on a 6x4 board, you could almost lose the game in deployment. If you deployed poorly, you'd maybe have no chance of getting stuff up the board. Things I liked about the look of Armageddon was that it's not straight objectives. It's not just sit on this spot and claim the objective. There was different things to do. You had to do it's break their spirit, which is destroy the kind of most expensive model or unit of your opponents. You had to take and hold stuff in your half and their half, and then there was I can't remember if it's line breaker or whatever, where you effectively have to get into their deployment zone and claim that. So it was quite interesting, but it also seems massively geared up for that kind of tournament scene, which I've never been into. So anytime I've been reading about it, it seems to be that the conversations are very kind of min-max heavy, and there are lots of discussion about optimizing things, and it just doesn't seem to have that same kind of narrative appeal to me, potentially. So I think that's one of the off-putting things. The other thing is the kind of list building. Again, it's still quite restricted, although it does make me think that the lists can be a bit more thematic. So there's a lot of fan supplements, and there's a whole kind of NetEpic Armageddon movement as well, keeping it fresh and adding stuff from the kind of current lore or from the kind of Horus Heresy lists and stuff like that to keep it updated. So there probably is a bit more room for flavor. But just with the initial, when you buy if you buy the rule book, you get Orcs and Marines and Imperial Guard because it's the Battle for Armageddon. So you get those lists, and it just felt quite limited in what you could take. So yeah, that didn't massively appeal to me. I wouldn't mind giving it a try. If it truly does combine the best of 2nd edition and 3rd edition, then I'd be open to giving it a try. But just from what I've seen, it just doesn't grab me in the same way. It feels too kind of it feels too much like a board game, if that makes sense, rather than a war game.
These are just our personal opinions for anybody that's an Epic Armageddon.
Yeah. Of course, again, I've got no authority to say any of this, and it could just be the way I've interpreted it. But I'm not criticizing because I love board games. I would happily play it as a board game if it was, and if it was an excuse to get that same collection of models out and get them on a table and play a different type of game. I'm totally open to it. But I think what I want from Epic is that kind of mass battles feel and that kind of commanding a massive army kind of feeling. Whereas I believe that Epic Armageddon again doesn't scale massively. I think 3,000 points is the kind of tournament size, and the idea is that if you go beyond that, it becomes quite cumbersome. I've got a rule set called Armageddon, which is designed for, I think it's like 1,500 points, which is meant to be really, really fun to play, and you can kind of play that in a couple of hours and have a great time. But again, at that point, you're playing with maybe 20 or 30 models on the table, and I just think that's not much different from playing a game of 40k or bolt action or something. So it's not got that same feeling to me as something like Epic Second Edition or Third Edition potentially.
Well, what I would say in its defence is that I would say that to me, from what I see online, is that the tournament seems fairly vibrant, and it seems that from what I can gather, it seems to be most people are playing Epic Armageddon. I would say more than Second Edition.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, it's something. If we hadn't started playing Second Edition at that point, I was kind of open to different rule sets, and if I had discovered that there was a kind of Glasgow scene for it, which I think there actually is.
Yeah.
And in fact, we hosted the World Championships in the last couple of years ago, wasn't it? Yeah, I'd have probably got into it, and I dare say, like, I would give that a go. I would definitely give it a go, and I'd be interested to see how it plays out.
No, definitely. I mean, I think for me personally, it's just because I think it's to do with the nostalgia aspect. I think part as well is to do with because I played so many games of Epic that I still know a lot of the unit stats, whether that's their close assault factor, their weapons, their movement, all these things. I still know all this stuff. So it's like there is a part, it's just familiarity as well. I know what you're saying about it's quite overwhelming because there are still, when we have games, there's units I don't use that often. Sorry, one of the things I should have probably mentioned is you and I think you did say it yourself, but I didn't, was that back in the 90s I only had these kind of plastic, the basic sets, but once I get back into it, I think from about 2005 onwards, I think I started trolling eBay and basically filling up my collection with the stuff that I always wanted but never had. So I've got my armies to a stage where the forces that I have, I don't have things like Tau. The ones that I do have, I've got really large forces, and I think I've got the vast majority of units, and if there's units I don't have, they tend to be ones I don't particularly want in the first place. So I'm quite happy with my collection. I kind of feel like it is done. I did pick up a few extra pieces last year from Peter Ramos, who is co-creator on Imperius Dominatus. He was selling off some of this legendary Primarch load, and I got a little corner of his collection. So that kind of filled a lot of the gaps that I had left over that I was bothered about, or not bothered about, but I kind of wanted them just because I had mostly everything else.
Yeah.
You know, for example, I finally got the Imperator, and I've got 2 Mega Gargants. Am I actually going to use them in games? I don't know. I don't really think so, because I still have that thing about that classic period when I never moved on, where it was even before Titan Legions, you know.
No, I'm the same. I appreciate like a lot of the stuff that came afterwards, like for Epic 40k and for Epic Armageddon, and then the kind of Forge World stuff and all that. I totally appreciate that the sculpts are better, and for the most part, I think some people say it went downhill for parts of it. But anyway, I just don't have the nostalgia for it, so I've never went for it in the same way. But yeah, if you show me something from Second Edition I don't have, I would probably bite your arm off for it, especially something I didn't have as a kid. So yeah, it's a funny one. The kind of nostalgia factor definitely plays a huge part in it.
Yep. So I think that pretty much brings us up to date. Imperius Dominatus is the latest one that's coming out. Hopefully, I'm going to have a conversation at some point with Peter and David that are responsible for it. So watch this space. So yeah, that's the kind of next thing that's still an ongoing project. Clearly, you and I are going to have a couple of games on Third Edition. Give that a go. My brother's talked about playing Epic again once this is over, so I'd imagine I'll still be doing Second Edition with him and flipping over to Third Edition. So it'll be quite interesting to see. Not that I don't know what Second Edition is anyway, but sorry, I should say NetEpic. But yeah, it will be interesting playing the different systems against each other. So far as, yeah, we've been a bit remiss in dealing with Epic up until now on this podcast, because is it fair to say it's our favourite game for both of us? I don't know.
Yeah, it is my war game. It's the only one I ever played as a kid, really. I think I said earlier, dabbled with a little bit of like Necromunda and 40k, but it was just buying miniatures. Epic was the only thing I ever actually sat down and learned the rules for, and even then, it turns out I didn't do a great job of that. But no, it's definitely the one that's most ingrained.
Yeah,
in my psyche. Yeah.
For me too. I mean, I did dabble a little bit with Space Fleet, and then I did the White Dwarf rules, which I think was it kind of made it more like a proper detailed game. I don't know how close it was to Battlefield Gothic, but
no, it was a bit more chip heavy, I think, cardboard heavy. But yeah.
aye, that was fine. I kind of dabbled in that a wee bit as Advanced Space Crusade, but really Space Hulk, I suppose, was the only one that came close. My brother had the first edition Space Hulk with the Deathwing and Genestealer games, and that's something else we're planning on doing once this is over, is recording all those missions and playing them again and recording them and sticking them in the channel. So that'll be fun. But yeah, Epic was always my first love, definitely from the wargaming side of things. I was always kind of split between that and the role playing. So, but yeah, as we were talking about earlier on, there's a lot of people having nostalgia at the moment. So I think really when we do more of these conversations, which we plan on doing, we'll probably look at second edition really first and foremost. There'll be a lot of conversation about that. And as I say, hopefully we'll get to talk a bit about third edition, and hopefully we'll get to talk about Imperius Dominatus at some point. So plenty of stuff for us to discuss. This is just the beginning. So if you've had enough already, I'm sorry about that, but there's plenty more coming. So yeah, hope you enjoyed listening, and yeah, we'll be back soon with more epic goodness. So until next time, keep on living the life of Die. Okay.
Yeah, it was good.
Hopefully it's recorded.